In the land where I was born, there are now women seeking justice. Justice for birth mothers. Oh Lord, hear my prayer.
Thank you for tuning into Justice for Birth Mothers. My name is Anna Kavanagh, co-founder and convener to the Alliance of Birth Mothers Campaigning for Justice, Ireland's largest non-Tusla funded group advocating on behalf of birth mothers in difficulty with Tusla, the Gardai and the family court. This is podcast number 24 in the series, and today I'm speaking with Rosie Heys. Rosie is a UK-based activist who has set up a support group for mothers and women in difficulties in the family courts. Rosie, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Anna.
Rosie, so to begin, can you tell me a little bit about yourself and how you ended up becoming an activist supporting mothers in difficulty in the family courts?
So I divorced in 2014, or started divorcing in 2014. And the first time I started supporting people was really as a Mackenzie friend. I was asked by someone who had contacted me via social media who was in terrible difficulties, and who could no longer afford lawyers, and would I go along to court with her, literally to hold hands? And that opened up a whole world to me where I became aware I wasn't alone. I wasn't the only one that was struggling, and that a lot of women were struggling with the same problem or the same problems. And specifically in relation to this woman, she had been sold, as had I, a high-interest litigation loan to fund supposedly her divorce from start to finish. And the amount that she was sold initially was that she would need something in the region of £50,000. So her lawyers organised a loan for £50,000. But those sums just kept increasing and increasing and increasing. And it was not until 2022 that her divorce was finally finalised. So during that entire period, all of her equity and all of her assets had completely been used up on not only funding the repeated returns to court, and then finally just going along with me, a completely inexperienced philosophy graduate with no training in law, but just to hold her hand, and no legal representation. So while the loans were sold to her on the basis that it would give her equality of arms, that she would be able to face her then husband, who was quite a wealthy individual and worked in finance, on an equal footing in relation to the division of assets, but also what would happen to the children. And that's crucial. The ultimate result was that down the line, she was left with nothing, including her children. So she neither had a home, a roof over her head, and nor did she have her children. And it had done none of the things it was supposed to do, the financing. And I had been sold the same sort of loan, but for a lot more money. The first estimate I was given was that my divorce, including children issues, would cost £100,000. Actually, they initially said 20,000, which seemed okay. It's a lot, but that's okay. Then they said 50. Then they said, we'll go for a loan for 100,000. And then they went for another 100,000, and then they went for another. And over the past 10 years, everything relating to that initial divorce, which the judge described as straightforward, has been completely turned on its head by the presence of, if you like, a third party in this divorce, in the person of these litigation funders, these litigation lenders, who pursued my home and pursued eviction, and I was even on the cusp of being pursued in bankruptcy. So the support group came out of that. We are not alone. There are not just two of us. There are probably thousands, tens of thousands of us across the UK. It seems this hasn't leapt across to Ireland yet, and I hope it never does, but I'm here to say there's a serious red flag if these litigation loans start entering the family law arena in Ireland as well, because they do not help, they harm, and they harm beyond all measure. If you do not have a home, if you don't have a roof over your head, and these loans are secured on your home, then you cannot house your children. And then, of course, the problem arises. What happens to the children if their mother is homeless? Well, they don't go to mum, they go to dad. Whether he's abusive, whether he's a good guy, either way, one of the things that happens is that these loans that from all the research I've done have issued from private equity, from what I would term vulture capitalism, a very male environment, have done nothing to serve the interests of justice for mothers in the family courts.
Motherhood is hard, support the mother and the child together. Do not tear this love asunder. Support, respect the mother. Justice for birth mothers. Oh Lord, hear my prayer.
Rosie, you mentioned there that these litigation loan sharks haven't arrived on the scene in Ireland. And certainly for the Alliance of Birth Mothers Campaigning for Justice, it's an issue that we have not come across.
Mm-hmm.
But what we have come across, in fact, is very heavy litigation on mothers. We have mothers in our alliance who have run up legal bills of up to €150,000 or more in the family courts in order to try and hold on to their children. And in actual fact, they have ended up losing their children. In the case of one mother, she actually had to stop and pull out of litigation because she had actually run out of money and she had run out of opportunities to raise money to continue her legal battle. And so she lost custody of her child. And what mothers are telling us, that these abusive men, they come full on, they are men of means, and they litigate heavy and they litigate hard.
Yeah.
And it can be dragged on over years and years. And what actually happens is that mothers end up losing their jobs. I spoke to one mother yesterday, just ahead of this podcast, and she was telling me that she would only have 2 days' notice for a court hearing, when in actual fact she should have had 14 days notice. She ended up sometimes having up to 3 separate court cases in the 1 week. And these would be on separate issues, but all of which could be dealt with in a single hearing.
Yeah.
And she actually ended up losing her job. She'd run out of all of her holiday leave, all of her parental leave, everything like that. It most certainly is a problem in Ireland. But of course, all of this can happen because the family courts are governed by this so-called in-camera rule, where women are not allowed to speak about what's happening to them inside the family courts. So there's just a veil of secrecy. So the abuse of women in the courts is kept well hidden.
Yes, no, I completely agree. I mean, in relation to the sheer cost in terms of your career, I lost 2 jobs because of having to go back to court repeatedly. And despite having the services of 2 very expensive law firms who were billing me, I mean, more than I was earning in a year per month in some cases. And actually, I'm not allowed to talk about it, but there has been a legal ombudsman decision in my favour against one of the law firms. All I can say relating to that is that the legal ombudsman published the decision, which says that they provided poor service and poor costs advice, and they were ordered to refund me almost £20,000, which I haven't received because I didn't grab it immediately. The presence of the litigation loan seemed to, in my view, allow the solicitors to drag out proceedings unnecessarily. And one of the things that really worries me about these litigation loans, so if you're talking about the woman you were speaking to yesterday having exhausted £150,000 of funds and still not getting to resolution, add to that £150,000 a litigation loan, and she is paying that £150,000 plus interest of 18 to 33%. So in some cases, these divorce litigation loans were charging 33% interest. 18% interest is pretty standard. These are very, very high interest loans, and it's year on year rolled over. So at the end, you can end up with more costs in interest than the actual cost of, which is already high, the litigation itself, which just throws people into the most awful financial circumstances.
Look into your mother's face. No one else can take her place. Justice for birth mothers. Oh Lord, hear my prayer.
What we've calculated, and what's happened in my case actually, is that where one of these loans are present, the division of assets goes like this. The law firm and the litigation lender will take 1/3 of everything, including the house. And then there should be another 2/3 divided between the divorcing couple. But often, and in my case, this is also true in my case, often that doesn't happen. So you don't even get 1/3. The lawyers and the litigation lenders end up with the lion's share of the entire equity in your home, in your divorce settlement, every single thing that you have. These are what's called all monies charges. They can literally come after every penny you've got, apart from your pension. What's happened again and again, as more and more people have come forward, and we've got one man in the group as well, his partner and he were both sold litigation loans, but neither of them knew that the other one had been sold a litigation loan. And it turned out that that was done fraudulently anyway, and the solicitor is now in prison. But that's one solicitor in prison. I think quite a few more maybe should be in prison for selling these loans. But anyway, but in their case, I mean, that's still not resolved. The case trundles on. Neither of them, and this started in 2016. In another case, very high net worth divorce, the divorcing couple had a large amount of money in cash, liquid, in shared bank accounts, enough to buy a house in London. I mean, it was a great deal of money. And instead of the lawyers, who were the same lawyers I went to, who had this finding made against them, but I'm not allowed to name them, I wish I could, instead of advising her to take half of the cash assets that were in their joint bank account, and put it into a separate bank account so she had control over that and he had the other half, and they could both employ lawyers and deal with the divorce that way, they advised her to get a loan to pay for the divorce. It turns out from the evidence that came out in the investigation that the law firm were being paid what I consider to be a hidden commission for selling these loans. And that was potentially the motivator for telling her, instead of just use your own money, take one of these loans, because they would get then a payment of 950 quid every time they sold one of these loans. Surprisingly, that evidence came out in the course of a legal ombudsman investigation, and the legal ombudsman said it was okay. I mean, it's astonishing. But what happens as well, and what research has shown, and there's quite a lot of press coverage of this now, where one of these litigation loans exists, the divorce lasts longer. And from experience, I can say potentially the divorce lasts longer because the solicitors are sitting there going, oh, right, there's this much equity, and they're seeing that as a target for them to earn, not as a limit or a budget, not to keep within these parameters, but this person has this much in cash, in assets, in their house, and therefore that is ultimately how much I can get out of this person. So I think that's one of the elements of why they drag out so long when one of these loans is present. But the other element of why they drag out so long when one of these loans is present is because the litigation lender then becomes involved in the divorce process. So I have been that lady that I spoke about at the very beginning who asked me to come along and hold her hand as a Mackenzie friend. We went to court and the litigation lender was present in court, had sent a barrister to court to make sure that they got their share. So you then have three people in the courtroom. You have the husband, the wife, the children to the side, and the litigation lender standing there, represented by a barrister at the cost of the parties. And there's quite a famous case that you can Google if you like. There's a reality star called Lauren Simon. She's a bit of a hero of mine. I've never met her, and I haven't watched The Real Housewives of Cheshire, but she's in that. She had one of these litigation loans, and at a certain point, she decided with her husband they weren't going to pay any more legal fees. They cut the litigation lender out of the picture and negotiated a settlement between themselves. They were then both dragged back to court by the litigation lender, who tried to reopen their divorce. And she basically told them to go and take a running jump. But I mean, she's probably still going to get dragged back into court for years more to come because of the presence of these lenders. Now, in relation to what an impact this has when there are children proceedings involved, they're not just used for financial proceedings, they're also used for paying. Children proceedings, it's an absolutely limitless, endless until the child turns 18. They never end. If you've got an abusive, aggressive person who wants to control his former spouse, the best way of doing it is via the children.
One song you don't want to hear is the cry of the mother and her child taken from her. Justice for birth mothers, oh Lord, hear my prayer.
Rosie, can you give me some examples of the heavy litigation that you are witnessing firsthand in the family courts in the UK?
One of my ladies called me last week saying, I'm going to have to go back to court again because there's everything causes a problem. He won't let me take my daughter to the doctor. He won't let me take my daughter to the dentist. He won't let my daughter go to after-school clubs, because all of these come under parental responsibility. And instead of it being with someone who's abusive, a situation where you agree the child can go to these after-school clubs, when she's got a tummy ache, I'll take her to the doctor. When she's got a toothache, I'll take her to the dentist. It becomes a sticking point and an opportunity to exercise control, which requires a return to court to get a specific issue order just to allow your child to go to the dentist. In my case, vast costs were incurred to allow my daughter to go on a school trip. I had to go to court to get permission from my then husband, who I was divorcing, to allow her to go to a school trip that I'd paid for. So it is limitless. And you add on top of that, one of these litigation loans, you're not just paying the court fees, you're not just paying the barrister's fees, you're not just paying the solicitor's fees or attending as a litigant in person, but then you get slammed with quite often half of your ex-spouse's fees because they have employed a barrister, and judges sort of decide that the unrepresented party should pay a percentage of that barrister when they're unrepresented. But you add on top of that 18 to 33% interest for everything, and you can see it's the road to ruin. It's shocking that the Solicitors Regulation Authority, that the Legal Services Board, that the Judicial Conduct Authority, that any of these organisations have allowed this kind of loan sharking to enter the world of family law, which is already so desperately stressful. And then they chuck in high interest debt, which has a huge amount of problems in itself. High interest debt. Debt is one of the major causes of suicide. Just start there. Do you really want another stress on top of a family that is already facing the stress of divorce?
Let not the sins of the father be visited on these children. Justice for birth mothers, oh Lord, hear my prayer.
The Alliance of Birth Mothers Campaigning for Justice supports mothers who are in difficulties, mainly with Tusla, which is our child and family agency, in the family courts. But there is an overlap there in what you have been saying, in that mothers have huge difficulties with legal representation. Now, we have what's called a free legal aid board here in Ireland, and some mothers actually qualify for free legal aid. There's huge difficulties with that. And then mothers who don't qualify for free legal aid have to pay their own legal team. And if they haven't got the wherewithal to do that, then they end up as lay litigants and they have to support themselves. So I suppose the purpose of our conversation, Rosie, has been to alert Irish people to the fact that there are litigation loan sharks operating in the UK. To the best of our knowledge, it hasn't actually happened here in Ireland, and it's something that we need to alert people about and make sure that if they do start to operate in Ireland, that they will be regulated. And as I say, all of this is allowed to happen because of the in-camera rule. Just finally, to wrap up our conversation, it has just come to my attention in maybe the last month or two that in actual fact, what's happening in the UK, what's happening in Ireland is actually part of a much wider problem. It's found in America, Canada, and across Europe. And I suppose Natalie Anderson has done a huge amount of work to uncover what's actually happening. It's all part of a universal pattern where women are being denied justice in the family courts. And it's, as you were speaking there, you know, a lot of what you were saying actually relates to what's happening in the Irish courts. And it's all part of a global pattern.
Yeah, it's litigation abuse. So one of the things that's been identified, just to go back to first principles, all of the women in my group who were sold these litigation loans, one of the bases on which they were sold the litigation loans is basically access to justice. The claim is you will have access to justice. The second thing that everyone had in common was that everyone had allegations or had been found to be a victim of domestic abuse. And domestic abuse, it's very rare it exists without there being financial abuse as well. So the argument of the solicitors and of the litigation lenders is that we are providing a wonderful service to help these poor women who are victims of abuse. And they have explicitly said that they target women who are victims of abuse to sell this product to. In order for you to have access to justice on an equal footing with your wealthy spouse who has been financially controlling and has been abusive. Now, one of the reasons that they're targeting women who've been abused, either financially or physically or both, is because then at that point, when you're filling in a form saying whether or not you've attended a mediation appointment, a MIAM, they can tick domestic abuse. And that means there's no mediation and there's no recommendation for mediation. Instead of mediation, which can work with properly qualified mediators who are aware of economic and physical and domestic abuse and is far less expensive, instead of that, you're going straight to court. Much more expensive, barristers involved, and it's going to take you years to unravel the whole thing. So the case of Lauren Simon, that's the direction it went. The Real Housewives of Cheshire Star, that's the direction it went, straight to court. And at the end, she and her husband got together and mediated something. And that is what has happened in quite a number of our cases. So despite the fact that there was abuse, a properly handled mediation has been possible in all of these cases. And if it had been approached in that way in the first place, there was no need for the litigation loan. So they pounce on the domestic abuse, they tick no mediation, they head straight to court, and it's a big earner from the start. Instead of focusing on the potential for a mediated settlement with properly qualified people who can deal with and mitigate for any abuse, any financial abuse. And so that's one of the things. I'm very wary. I appreciate that access to justice is necessary. At the point where we were sold these loans, or I was in 2014, domestic violence and domestic abuse, it was not subject anymore to any form of funding. So it wasn't subject to legal aid. I think the law changed around about 2019. So now, regardless of your financial position or your spouse's financial position, you can now get legal aid if there's domestic abuse present, although I believe it is still means tested. And bear in mind that legal aid is something that people are expected to pay back. It's not a gift, it's a loan. But it's on a reasonable level of interest, and it's you're dealing with a reasonable, sensible and humane organisation behind the financing. They're not just out to make money. So I'm very wary. We need access to justice, but these litigation loans at such a high cost on divorce cases where if there is someone abusive involved in the process, they can drag on for years, and they will, are never going to be beneficial, because you're never going to get to the end of the case. It is never going to stop costing you money. So actually, it's not only the in-camera rule, but it's also the fact that judges so rarely say, stop making these endless applications, you're just bullying her, or, stop. They don't get to a solution. The number of court cases that I've attended where it's been pushed off to another day, decisions have been pushed off to another day, the door has been left open repeatedly, or the order hasn't been clear, and then you have to go back to court to clarify it at more cost. That's one problem. And the judges could deal with that by really thinking about what they're doing and getting it right the first time, and closing the loopholes so that both parties are well served and they can close the divorce case, at least in relation to finances. For children, they can do the same. I can understand why a solicitor or a barrister, but more so the solicitors, don't want the case to close. As long as the case is rumbling on, if it goes on for a decade, they're making £500 an hour for a decade. It's fantastic. But the judges could actually take this in hand. And while I've had judges commenting at cases where I've been a Mackenzie friend on, that these litigation loans are a bad thing, that the debt is becoming unmanageable, and that there will be nothing left for this family and for these children, they still don't take steps to close the door and close the litigation. They leave it open so the solicitors and the barristers can continue going back, reopening it and starting afresh. It's that the whole process is not geared towards a sensible and healthy solution in the interests of the children. It's a money-making machine.
I think on that note, we shall wind up our conversation for today, Rosie. In your particular case, you're talking about couples who are divorcing, But as you're speaking, I'm thinking of the mothers that we advocate for who are in difficulties with Tusla. And they are dragged through the courts over years and years with no hope of resolution and no hope of getting their children back. And as I've already said, many of these mothers are unemployable because they've been dragged into court at very short notice for spurious reasons. And their access to their children, they're not given regular dates, and their access is given to them at very, very short notice. So I think it's something that we need to talk about again.
Yeah.
And I think there is an onus on us now to pull together all of the various advocacy groups in all of the countries across Europe and America, and create some kind of an international alliance that will show that this is not just a problem, that the lack of justice for mothers and for women in the family courts is a global problem. I think that then is our note of hope on which to end, that we can form some kind of global alliance to advocate on behalf of these women. Thank you so much, Rosie.
Thank you, Anna. I hope that was helpful, and I hope this doesn't arrive in Ireland. The family court is already bad enough. Anything relating to our children and protecting them and keeping them safe, and family court is involved in that, is just going to be traumatic and difficult. And it needs to be simplified. Daylight needs to shine in, and it's no place for dodgy funders and dark money.
Justice for Birth Mothers is a co-production between the Alliance of Birth Mothers Campaigning for Justice and 𝑀𝑜𝑡ℎ𝑒 Media. The podcast series received no funding and is made possible by a team of volunteers. Thank you for listening, and please share this podcast with your family, friends and contacts. Until next time, 𝐵𝑖𝑟𝑡ℎ
In the land where I was born, there are now women seeking justice. Justice for birth mothers, oh Lord, hear